So 4 years ago, I put out a video on how I shoot film in low light in the studio. I talked about metering, pushing your film, and shooting handheld without a tripod with film cameras in a low light portrait session. I have grown a lot as an artist and as a person since making that video. My practices in the studio look a lot different today. And today I want to give you a little bit more in-depth understanding of how I shoot film in the studio, go over when to shoot handheld or when to put your camera on a tripod, what pushing film is and why you should do it, a couple extra things, and then we'll get into the studio and do a little in-the-moment real-time photography. So the cameras that I'm using when I'm in the studio shooting film are typically two medium format cameras, the Pentax 6x7 and the Mamiya RB67. I use medium format cameras because I like the massive increase in detail that you get out of each shot, and I love how the cameras feel in my hands, and I love how they help me create exactly what I'm thinking of creating. That said, if you want to shoot film in the studio, there is only one thing your camera needs to have, and that is manual controls. When you have manual controls on a film camera, that means that you're in complete control of the shutter speed, the aperture, the film speed, and also your focus. Sometimes they have autofocus, but quite a lot of them are manual focus. This is super important because when you are making very intricate lighting decisions, you want complete control of the exact exposure you're taking. Manual cameras allow you to dial in those settings exactly to where they need to be, and you do this with a light meter. I have been using a phone app called My Light Meter Pro for all of my studio sessions where I'm using continuous light, and it does the job perfectly. I just aim it right at my subject's face because I'm usually metering for the highlights, not the shadows, take a meter reading, and once I have that, I can determine exactly what my settings need to be on my camera. I like super contrasty images, and I usually properly expose my model's face. And so using your light meter to expose for your model's face, meters for the highlights, it helps you ensure that their face is going to be properly exposed, which is what I'm looking for. Phone meters are a lot better than you'd think they are because for the most part, they are just using the technology built into your phone that properly exposes digital photos all day long. So I vouch for My Light Meter Pro and really a lot of other phone light meter apps for continuous photography. Apps like this, in my experience, don't have any sort of programming that would allow them to handle strobes or flash photography. So getting a real light meter for those purposes would be very useful. Now, shooting handheld in the studio. In my video from 4 years ago, I had this rule called the rule of the 60th, and I still stand by that rule actually. If your meter is giving you a reading for a shutter speed at 1/60th of a second, you should never go lower than that if you're trying to take a handheld shot. The reason for that is because if you do, the image that you're taking could just end up with a lot of shutter drag and shakiness, because below a 60th for the most part is just not going to be fast enough for you to take a super steady, sharp shot. Shooting handheld in the studio can be such a breeze because you just have so much more room. You can get up on a ladder and aim your camera down, and then you can switch right over and get back on the ground and shoot directly in front of them. You're just a lot more mobile. If you need to go below a 60th of a second, that is when you set your camera on a tripod. A tripod is great for incredibly steady shots, super specific focusing that maybe you can't get right while holding your camera up to your eye. My favorite thing as of late is using the tripod as a way to shoot higher apertures with way slower shutter speeds to still get an incredibly sharp, properly exposed result. Up on screen, I'm showing a couple images that I've shot at a 15th of a second all the way down to 1/8 of a second on a tripod. I also recommend getting a shutter release cable if you are going to be using a tripod. A shutter release cable allows you to completely hands off of the camera, fire your shutter so that the vibrations that come from you actually touching the camera are completely eliminated. You're hands off. You're not affecting the camera at all. And that's super important when shooting at slow shutter speeds. Some cameras even have a function called mirror lockup, which I personally haven't used a ton, but what this does is right before you take your photo, you lock your mirror up, it flips up, you can no longer see through the camera, and then you take your photo, and that eliminates the mirror moving and slapping up and down and vibrating while you're trying to take an exposure, which can also lead to a shakier image if you're shooting at a low shutter speed. Now, what is pushing film and why and when should you do it? Pushing film is purposefully underexposing your film in the moment. Let's say you're shooting 400 speed film and you decide to tell your light meter that it's 800 speed. You're gonna have the opportunity to shoot higher apertures and shutter speeds given the fact that you're telling your meter that you're shooting 800 speed, and because of that, when you get that meter reading, you're technically underexposing your 400 speed film. One of the main benefits is being able to shoot at higher shutter speeds handheld when the sensitivity of your film wouldn't allow for it at its base ISO. I used to do this a ton with my work because, frankly, A lot of my lights at the time, back in 2020, were just not bright enough. Affordable bright lights have gotten so much more accessible since I started shooting film in 2018. The base model lights you're getting now for a decent price used to be so much more expensive just a few years ago. So I tended to shoot 800 speed film, pushed to 1600 in development. Because of this, I was able to shoot at slightly higher shutter speeds and get a properly exposed image, even though I was underexposing my film in the moment. Pushing your film kind of like lets you shoot at a higher ISO, but some of the main details are that you'll get higher contrast, a lot more grain, and of course, you'll be able to shoot with your camera at a higher shutter speed handheld. For instance, I wanna say this was in 2020, I got to this shoot in the middle of the night where I realized I already had a roll of Portrait 400 loaded into the camera. That was gonna be way too low of a shutter speed for me to do this portrait session and get properly exposed images. So I decided to rate it at 1600 in my meter and push it 2 stops in development to get up to that 1600 speed via push processing. And the photos came out great. So much of my work around this era is all push processed. It's something that I don't do now out of necessity, but I do now out of desire for experimentation and slightly different results. So if you don't have enough light, you always have the option to get more light, but if you can't do that, push your film a little bit. As long as your local lab offers push process film, and if you're processing at home, you can just look up how to push process your film, and it usually just adds another couple minutes to your development time. Now, let's talk about lighting. I bring 2 lights with me to the studio. I bring the Amaran 300C, which is a bicolor and RGB light that can do 360 degrees of colors, and also warm and cool color tone white light. I have 2 attachments that I bring with me every single time, one being this massive light dome softbox, and the other being this Spotlight SE with a controllable iris. Both of these attachments do very different things with the light. The softbox creates a very soft, balanced light. I've used this softbox to create very nice fall off on close-up portraits, and I've also used it to light my entire background a single color with a very nice, beautiful, soft quality of light. And then the Spotlight SE creates a spotlight. The optional iris that you can put in it allows you to change the size of that spotlight, but this is a really great way to kind of make very specific pin lights. I've been loving using this light as a way to isolate a subject in a circle on the wall or create an extra shape for my subject to stand in. And next up, the projector. I've been using a projector for my photography for years. There's so many different ways you can use it, and that's what's most exciting about it in my opinion. The piece of software that I use with the projector is just Photoshop. You load up Photoshop and you make whatever you want, anything that your heart desires, anything at all. You could be making a circle, you could be projecting a photo, make it full screen, project it, use it as a tool for your creativity. I use an Epson Home Cinema 880, and this is just something I picked up at Best Buy for maybe $300 2 or 3 years ago. Before it, I was using a 5 or 6 year old Epson that my grandfather gave me. Now, let's get in the studio with Christian and Haley. I've got a concept that I want to shoot, and we'll talk about the composition and metering decisions I make in the studio for this shoot. So we are in the Ivory Space, a studio in downtown LA that I use all the time. And like I said, my friends Christian and Haley have joined me today. They are incredibly talented dancers. I actually went on tour with Christian where I took photos and he danced. And I have this concept where I want to try to fit their bodies into different shapes in a creative way that kind of puts them together. No, that's good, that's good. Why don't you take like 5 steps forward towards me? Yeah, like right there. Maybe stand on this side instead. Yeah, this is gonna be much easier for me since it's so wide, like, yeah, cool. And then bring your arms down. I'm using a light meter on your face. All right, at a 3.5, I'm getting a 60th of a second at 400. Cool, not bad. Not bad at all, y'all. 3, 2, 1. My first meter reading was f3.5 at a 60th of a second with 400 speed film. We're shooting Cinestill 400D. And I think this turned out pretty good. I don't think I 100% nailed the focus on Haley in the background, but the overall vibe and look of the image is exactly what I was going for. I feel like with a couple more revisions and maybe trying it with a different lens, I can get exactly what I want out of this concept. Right there.
Okay.
We're getting somewhere, we're getting somewhere.
Okay, we're finding it.
Yeah. Actually, you're gonna need to take one more step towards me, I think. 3, 2, 1, and... But I want you to remember that pose.
Yeah.
And here we go. Got it. That was sick. Okay. Let's just keep it going. Next, I got out the Mamiya RB67 on a tripod to shoot a couple instant film photos with my Frankenstacks back. Instax Square Film has a film speed of 800, and when I shoot Instax Square to make sure it's perfectly sharp, I always shoot it at f8 or higher. It's much more focused on Haley. 2, 1. Let's just shoot one more on this instant film and then we'll be done. And hold it. Got it. Bro, if we nailed that on instant film,
sick.
Like that's pretty cool off rip. It's starting to come out. And these images came out properly exposed and they look awesome. I don't love the framing and I wish I had a slightly larger scope of an image, but for the sake of the video and just exposing the film right, they look perfect. Haley, maybe what we do for this first one is I just shoot through your hands and we just like get one like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really sick. Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. 3, 2, 1, and I'm gonna try one more like that. All right, 3, 2, 1, and these images by far are my favorite from the shoot, where I had Haley hold her hands up and Christian was in a spotlight in the distance. Using a fairly wide angle lens in this way is super cool, and these just turned out sick. Personally, I think the landscape version of this image shines so much, and the vertical version of the image is just not framed all that great, but that's okay. We got one version of it that's perfect. Point your toes. I just want to make sure you can do it. Here. And lastly, we did one more look where Christian's face was illuminated by bright, warm white light, and Haley was kind of in this sea of red light. At an aperture of f2.8, I got 1/125th of a second, which is more than fast enough to shoot handheld with the Pentax. I think these photos came out super lovely. I think the close-up is the best version of this image, but it's nice to note that regardless of where you're standing, you will get that same exposure in the studio as long as you meter for the highlights on your subject's face. And with that, our shoot is wrapped, and I'd like to take a second to thank the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by experts across filmmaking, design, film photography, freelancing, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills or hobbies, passions, or even side hustles to the next level. For my upcoming shoots like the one we did today, I've been wanting to add physical props of my own design through 3D modeling and printing. I honestly had no idea where to start. It's all very intimidating. But with classes and learning paths on Skillshare, it has been pretty easy to pick up and learn. I'm not ready to show you guys my designs quite yet. Look forward to that in the future. And I just watched through my mentor, Dan Rubin's class on lifestyle photography, where he covers everyday storytelling in his own way. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. And that is how I shoot film in the studio in lower light conditions, how and when I use a tripod and when I go handheld, and a little bit of a real life application of me actually doing it. And honestly, a couple of these photos are some of my favorites now. I feel like I really made some cool stuff today. Thank you so much for watching. It has been a pleasure as always. I'm Linus, and I will talk to you guys later. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.